All right, so going to go through the competitive meta check-in. Been over a year. I've got a little bit extra data. This time around, I'm mostly going to focus on competitive play. I'm going to be looking at the top decks. I'm not going to be looking at everything, so this will be a faster video. Numbers are improving. I cut a lot of speculative things, some numbers I didn't feel quite great with. So I just wanted to hone in on the things that I'm pretty sure about. Once again, outliers are still possible, and this isn't the end all be all. Things are kind of evolving and changing. Meta's changing all the time in small, subtle ways. I've also added some TCG1 data in as well. I will start with some newer meta decks. I should say newer, it says never. But I think these might be players in the future. First one I'm going to talk about is Dce.dek. This idea is kind of around. I took it from, I think, a deck I saw Red was playing. Arcalemo, sorry if I'm butchering her name. We've been playing it. His version contains Gengar. Mine does not. Mine's a little more streamlined, but this is kind of what I ended up on. The big idea is that Wigglytuff is our big attacker, and then you have Ghastly and Scyther for free pivoting, and you can recur those DCs with Ghastly and use Scyther to swing in as well. Also be Swords Dancing when possible. Trainers I haven't really locked in on yet, but I want to keep it pretty aggressive with gusts and plus powers, things like that. So looking at the numbers so far, I did win a league with this deck. And I think it can be a real deck. I don't have great numbers yet, but I do have a good amount of information thanks to kind of pooling with Arc, who also gave me some data. So I have a pretty good idea. So far, pretty good against Psystall. Now, that might change because it's basically two players, myself and Arc, who are pretty well versed, so that could change when more people start playing it. That would be interesting to know. I don't think it will stay that high. I think it will dip down a little bit. Also seems to be okay against DFW. Arc's Gengar version struggles a little bit more with this. I personally don't struggle with DFW at all in the non-Gengar version, so I think it could be a pretty good matchup. I left eggs in there. I meant to cut that. But surprisingly, we do have a lot of eggs matchup data because a lot of people were playing turbo eggs at the time when we were taking data. But it kind of rinses turbo eggs pretty easily. Also, pretty solid against Wigmar, a standard 50-50 split. Bad matchups, DFP looks like something it struggles with. Surprisingly, you would think with the overlap of Psystall and DFP, it would not be less of a problem, but not quite sure what's going on there yet. Rain Dance just kind of washes us out. Not quite sure what's going on there, but we don't have many answers for a good setup Blastoise or something like that, or Articuno. DF Zard also seems to be pretty bad because we are relying on our grass types. Zard obviously hits that, and if it's DF Zard where it's running Hitmonchan, then we're getting hit for a lot of weaknesses, essentially. So like I said, I think this is just run by a lot of solid players, so I think those numbers will drop once we start getting some more data. I am interested to see where this can go. We also have Wigzoo. I've talked about this on the last video. Still a few developments with this. Not too many people playing this. It is hard to set up. It's not super reliable. It does seem to have a good matchup with Psystall, but once again, I think a lot of some of the best players are playing this deck. This is not a beginner's deck, so some of those numbers might be coming from there. Rain Dance is also atrocious matchup for this deck, just because it takes you so long to set up. You can't deal with a combo deck. You can't set up with a setup Blastoise, Articuno, etc. So, interested to see where this goes as well. I think these will be decks in the future, but need more data. So, going to our actual decks, first up we have Psystall. Obviously, the boogeyman of the format. It has, basically more than a third of the championships from winning leagues or winning events. It has some great matchups, obviously. Look at the spread. It's coming pretty close to even with Moltres, which is a new development. I'll talk more about that when we get to Moltres. A lot of the aggressive decks, it has a pretty good matchup against DFW or DFP, your Tradmakers. Rain Dance has a great matchup against just because it has so many of those basic Pokemon. You don't fear getting blown out by Rain Dance as much. Also, slightly a lead on Wigmar. That's getting really close. Also, very interesting. We'll talk more about that when we get to Wigmar. Bad matchups so far are kind of Wigzoo and DCE. I would say those are more speculative for now. I would like more data. I think those numbers will go down, but those could be maybe the Psystall killer. But once again, need more data for sure before I can make that claim. One of my concerns with this is that these numbers might actually be closer to what it really is because of the amount of players that are playing this deck. Another concern I have is that so many people are picking up this deck that don't know much about the format because they think it's the BDIF. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the Psystall numbers, but I feel like they're probably pretty close to as correct as we can get. This is Moltres, second up by Luke. His version included Ditto. I think Ditto is the right addition. We cut Muck a while ago in most decks. Ditto seems to be improving Moltres' numbers. As you can see, a lot of the numbers have gone up. Moltres was in a rough spot, but we're getting some good matchups here. Like 80% against DFP is kind of insane. I don't know what happened to DFP, but that's where it's at. Pretty good against Wigmar. Those Dittos really help against even Magmars, but really Wigglytuffs. I experienced that myself at Gen Con. Really helped me with that matchup because I ran into it a few times. Pretty good against DFW, because your birds also have that resistance. Once again, using Ditto to help with the aggressive Pokemon. Also pretty solid against Tradmaker. Real problems would be Psystall once again, but that number is narrowing. And then DF Zard. DF Zard is kind of one of those speculative decks. I didn't put it on the list. I need way more data on DF Zard. But basically, it's a Dodrio deck using Hitmonchan, Zard, and then some other attackers to try to hit for weakness. It's a little more speculative, but I feel okay about. Wigmar has seen some good improvements. So, once again, it's only won one championship, but it seems more viable against Stall than ever. I think Tradmaker is kind of keeping these numbers down as well, just because Tradmaker decks do prey upon the Dodrios. Pretty central to Wigmar's plan. Has an even matchup with Dce.dek, a little more speculative, but pretty good against DFP, and very good against Rain Dance. Now, people have been telling me that it's because Rain Dance is being piloted by new players. I have some good player data, and that matchup is still rough. So I think it's because I think they can just kill the Squirtles so quickly, or the poison, or the Smogs are helping with that. Maybe it's the smoke screen that keeps them from going off. I'm not sure, but it across the board can deal with Rain Dance. I feel confident about that now. Has kind of a bad matchup against Psystall, but that number's pretty close. I would take a 48% against Psystall is actually pretty good when you look at the full meta. Seems to really struggle against Moltres. I think that could be from the Dittos, their own Magmars, etc. DFW seems like a horrendous matchup for it just because it can't exploit weaknesses, and then Wigmar can't exploit its weaknesses. Also struggles against Tradmaker, probably for those same weakness reasons. Now, that being said, I think Wigmar might be ready to step in and take DFW's place as the Psystall killer. Don't know. Speculation, but I think that's possible. Next up, we have DFW. This is a list by ogrehvnds, who used to win the BCO SS1. It, of course, only has one championship under its belt. Still looks like it has some okay matchups, particularly against Tradmaker, which is interesting because a lot of the Drio decks struggle against Tradmaker. Also pretty good against Wigmar, like we already said. Bad matchups. Psystall seems to be a problem. That number has kind of widened as we get more data. Bad against Moltres, and as Moltres is an upcoming deck, that might be a problem. DFP, it also has issues with, probably for that psychic weakness, and then really struggles against Rain Dance. I think Rain Dance just goes off too quickly to let DFW set up. But that being said, those numbers are pretty close. So DFW, not any huge glaring weaknesses other than Rain Dance. That 45% isn't that crazy. We're looking for about a 50% on most matchups. So still seems very, very balanced. Next up, we have the Tradmaker. This is a list by Ophthalmoscope. It only has one championship under its belt. I think the Buzz Chan list is probably the best one we've got, just because we need that Chan to hit a lot of the weaknesses in the format. And then Buzz hits the Drios and Squirtles, for instance. As you can see here, it has a great matchup against Rain Dance because it kills Squirtles dead. It's pretty good against DFP, also good against Wigmar, so a lot of those Drio-based decks appear in the good matchups. Bad matchups, Psystall it really struggles against. It just doesn't have the pivots to deal with that because it's running Scyther instead of Drio. Same kind of struggles against Moltres, not that crazy. It's only 5% off from 50%. And then also struggles with DFW, just because of those pivots, I believe. Now, that being said, I think this is a viable deck. just because the amount of Drio, but having a weakness to Psystall makes this a kind of iffy proposition for a tournament, so keep that in mind as well. Rain Dance is one of our last ones. I think we have one more after this. This is a pretty standard list by Ophthalmoscope. It's won 2 championships. It has very polarized matchups, as you can see. It's got great matchups against DFW, DFP. I left eggs in there. It was funny. It really obliterates eggs. Also very good against Wigzoo, like we've said before. Has some pretty bad matchups, too. Psystall is pretty bad for it. I don't have much for Moltres, which is interesting, so I didn't put it in here. So that'd be interesting to find out if it's Psystall in general. Struggles against Wigmar, the Tradmakers, like I said before, and Dce.dek. So interesting. Pretty good matchups against your Drio decks and Wig decks. Bad against other things. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at a tournament meta is, what am I expecting here? Finally, we have DFP. DFP's kind of had a fall off. It has won a championship. It really only has 2 good matchups, DFW, like we said, and Dce.dek. Just because of those weaknesses, I believe. It's really struggling right now. I don't know if new people are picking it up to play as their first deck. It is a deck that I've recommended in the past, so that might be partially my fault. But as you can see, the numbers are not so great. Having a lot of trouble with Psystall. Moltres, it just gets blown out by. Not quite sure what's going on there. And then Wigmar, Tradmaker, Rain Dance, it has a lot of issues with. So a lot of the aggressive decks, it also has problems with. So looking at win percentages, you get something kind of interesting. Over all the games played, Moltres has the highest actual win percentage, slightly above Psystall. Something to keep in mind. I think this has a lot to do with good players playing Moltres, and then playing that new Ditto package, and then a lot of people playing Psystall and kind of tanking the number. So I think that's what's going on there. Tradmaker being at such a high position is also really interesting. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. If good players are playing Tradmaker just because it's an unconventional list, or if they know they want to prey upon a Dodrio meta, not sure. But it's kind of cutting out a lot of the other Drio-based decks. Rain Dance also higher than some of the other Drio-based decks. DFW still in that top tier, but I could see Wigmar creeping ahead of that. I'm kind of interested in how this pans out, but trying to keep this one short. Still having huge internet issues. If you want to join the Discord, links down below, and I hope to see you around playing some Pokemon.